All right, looks like we've got a few people coming in now. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's event with Martha Cooley and Anne Germanacos for the celebration of Martha Cooley's latest novel, Buy Me Love. My name is Erica. I will be hosting you tonight. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a few upcoming events we have for this week. Tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific time to see Curtis Sittenfeld with Jane and Kelly McGonigal celebrating the paperback release of Rodham. And on Thursday, the 17th, we'll be hosting Chris Malcolm Belk and Alex McElroy for a discussion of Belk's new book, The Natural Mother of a Child, a memoir of non-binary parenthood. And for tonight, we have Anne Germanacos, who is the author of the short story collection In the Time of the Girls, published by BOA Editions in 2010, and Tribute, published by Rescue Press in 2014. Together with her husband, Nick Germanacos, she ran the Ithaca Cultural Studies program on the islands of Kalymnos and Crete. She also runs the Germanacos Foundation in San Francisco. And Martha Cooley is the author of 2 novels, The Archivist, a national bestseller published in a dozen foreign markets, 33 Swoons, and Guesswork, which is a memoir. A professor of English at Adelphi University, she has published short fiction, essays, and co-translations in numerous literary magazines. Enjoy the show, everyone. Handing it off to you, Anne.
Thank you, Erica. So here I am with my old teacher. Martha and I met 20 years ago, just about now, at the Bennington Writing Seminars, and have maintained and grown our relationship ever since. I'm sorry we're not in person tonight, but this is the next best thing. It's always a pleasure to speak with Martha, and I'm particularly excited to talk about Buy Me Love. I didn't let myself read it until a couple of days ago because I wanted it to be right front and center in my mind and heart, and believe me, it has not gone anywhere. It's with me. Martha, I thought to begin with a little bit of reading, just a portion from the book, where your choice, wherever you'd like. Go ahead.
I would be happy to do that, but before I do that, I just want to thank you, and these 20 years have been very precious to me, and being in dialogue with you about this and about so many other books has been and is a real joy. So I'm really glad to be here with you here in San Francisco, virtually. Hi, San Francisco. And hello to everyone who's out there for tuning in. Thank you. And thank you to Green Apple Books, which was very, a bookstore open and receptive to me. And I remember very well doing an event with Anne a few years back for Guesswork. So I have a very strong visual as if I were there. So, okay, so I'll read you a little bit from not quite the beginning of the book. This is about, a quarter of the way in. The book does concern, among other things, a woman who is in possession of a lottery ticket worth $100 million, which fact she does not find out right away. I'm not giving anything away. This becomes pretty clear, but not right away in the narrative. So I'll share with you the moment when she buys the ticket, which is not a predetermined act. It is not something she plans on doing. So you'll sort of get a sense of her. Her name is Ellen, and this happens in Park Slope, Brooklyn. If there are any East Coasters there who've been to Brooklyn, you might know that neighborhood. And it happens in the year 2005. Jaywalking across 6th Avenue, Ellen opened the bodega's brass-handled door. Ah, that scent, with an overlay of freshest coffee. The proprietor, a short, oval-faced man, raised both hands in greeting. The dog by the register raised its head for a moment, then dropped back to sleep. "Morning," the proprietor said in a gruff, cheerful voice. "Morning, Mr. Reyes." He gestured in the direction of the avenue she had just crossed. A car sat in the middle of the intersection, waiting to turn. Immediately behind it, a beat-up black Lincoln honked aggressively. Car services, idiots, those drivers. Why can't Brooklyn have regular taxis like in the city? The Lincoln's driver leaned out of his window and began yelling at the driver ahead of him. Mr. Reyes clucked his tongue. One of these days, he said, you're going to walk against that light and get mowed down. Those guys can't drive to save their own lives. Oh, I'll be fine, but thanks for worrying about me. Your usual? He reached for the coffee pot. Please. And one of those cookies your wife makes, they're so good. I haven't put them out yet. First have some of this. He handed her a paper cup filled to its brim. She sipped cautiously. Strong, hot, reassuring. She fished a $10 bill from her pocket and handed it over. Anything smaller? Asked Mr. Reyes. Oh, sorry, hang on a sec. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her wallet, attempting to open it with one hand while stabilizing her coffee with the other. Put that cup down, said Mr. Reyes. You're going to spill all over yourself. Setting the cup on the counter, she spread open her billfold and walked the tip of her forefinger through its contents. No singles, just larger bills. No dice. I went to the bank last night. All I've got are 20s. Rich lady, eh? Mr. Reyes chuckled. I wish. You could be. What, rich? Yeah, you should play this new lottery game. Win big time. Really big. Like what? Like 100 million, he smiled. That's the jackpot. She sipped more coffee. But I never play. I mean, I've never even bought a lottery ticket. Too complicated, all those rules. Complicated? Nah, it's easy. You just pick 7 numbers. See? The printed form he handed her had 7 empty squares in the middle. Tiny text swarmed across the white spaces above and below the squares. Squinting, she reached into her bag in search of her reading glasses. Mr. Reyes pointed to something like a cash register sitting on the counter near the dog, a modest white box with a small keyboard. Don't bother reading anything on that form, he said. It's all automated. All you got to do is pay your dollar and pick your numbers. They can be single or double digits. It doesn't matter. I'll punch them into that little machine and you check your TV tomorrow to see if you're the winner. I don't own a TV. Really? His brows rose. You don't get bored? I do get bored. That's why I don't own a TV. He laughed. Ah, well, I can't make it through a day without watching a little soccer. Plus the news, you know, if something should happen. If something should happen, I've got a radio, so I'd know. Yeah, sometimes I wonder why we need to see everything. Who wants to watch buildings fall down over and over? Exactly. Or car bombing, suicide attacks. We've got ourselves into quite the mess over there, Mr. Reyes, haven't we? Hard to believe we've been at war over 2 years already. Hi, Udanos, listen, you should really try the new lottery. It's called Pick 7. These crazy times we live in. I just have this feeling one of my customers is going to win big. I'll even say a prayer for you. She laughed. Who will you pray to, Mr. Reyes? A divine figure, of course. Jesus, Mohammed, Buddha. I rotate them each week. Today's Monday. I'll have to check my calendar. You rotate them? Really? He nodded earnestly. To increase the odds, he said. Look, buy a ticket and bring in your numbers tomorrow. That's when the drawing is. I'll tell you if you're a winner. Even if you don't hit the jackpot, they're giving out lots of smaller prizes. Wouldn't you like a few extra grand in your bank account? Or a trip to Barbados with your boyfriend? He smirked in a friendly, non-lascivious way. Ha, she said. Right, my boyfriend, Casper the Friendly Ghost. Ah, well, escaping to Barbados by yourself wouldn't be so bad, would it? The coffee had cooled to just the right temperature. A reprieve, a few instants in the seat of happiness. The lottery form, 7 empty boxes waiting to be filled in. You'll get a cut if I win, right? You bet. Mr. Reyes's smile elongated, revealing a pair of gold-capped incisors. All right, then. Here's $1. Pray to whomever you like. I'll take whatever help I can get. He grinned, gold teeth glinting. You'll get it. Okay. Oh, your cookie. Wait, I almost forgot. I wouldn't let that happen.
Lovely. Thank you. I love hearing you read it. That's quite the moment as well. The whole book turns on it, although, as readers will find out, there's constant turnings, and I can only use my hands to show how those, the mechanism of plot works in this book is just remarkable to me, Martha. And in some sense, I thought it's an old-fashioned book in that it's very, very plot driven. I can only imagine how you worked that, and I'd love to hear something about that. And there's an extremely sharp focus on details of thought and feeling, action, and the physical world. It occurred to me throughout reading that it could be made into a film. I don't know if others have said that. But beyond all that, what the way it's plotted and what it teaches reader and writers about plot makes it utterly contemporary. I thought while I was reading, is to believe in plot to believe in life? I think so. And I hadn't thought of that before. It's reading your book that made me think about the connection between plot and life. And I've been made to think about plot in entirely new ways. And I wonder if you have some comments.
Oh gosh. I mean, in a way, I'm so startled because plot was and still is, I think, a word that sort of sends me, running for the hills. Like, I can't do that. It's hard. And I think because plot is so often associated in a reader's mind and in a writer's mind with contrivance, right? With a sort of the artifice that when it's not handled well is just screaming, look at me, bells and whistles. I'm manipulating you, reader. I'm manipulating you, characters. We're all going to sort of get through this, but it's all sort of a contrivance. It's all a concoction. It's all a very overt marionette work, puppeteering. And for me, I guess what was happening in this book all along was a contending less with plot than with the whole question of coincidence and chance. Because I wanted to have a story, let's put the word plot aside, but just a story that was filled with what I think is actual in our lives, which is a shit ton of coincidence. I mean, we're trained as readers and writers to think, oh, too much coincidence, that's really bad writing, and then the skies open and just in time, help drop down from the helicopter. And we think, I'm being whipped around here. But in fact, in our actual lives, there is a great deal that has that feel of, oh my, you're kidding, right? No, not that. But then it is, then it happens, then it occurs. So I wanted to contend with this question of coincidence and make it somehow sort of push past the initial barrier of no, to, well, but yeah, and yeah, and yeah, and oh, and that, and yeah. It's like one of the characters in the novel, who's a minor character but important, a man named Bruno, says coincidences are like salt sprinkled on our lives, and they add to the taste that we have for our lives. I think they awaken our curiosity, our sense of astonishment. And I was trying to also get at that, like, what do you do when something preposterous happens to you? And whether we win lottery tickets or not, I think we can all point to certain moments in our lives that have felt preposterous and yet are real, and have an emotional or an intellectual valence that we accept as real and that we have to work with. So that may be a sort of roundabout way of answering your question, but if plot is life, then it isn't, I think, in that sense of its twists and turns being somehow not at all unlike our real experience, but fiction has to contrive them in certain ways. And I did not plot that. I mean, I'm not the one who has like the whiteboard and the mystery writer who, the whodunit. Like I don't do any of that. I just had to fumble my way through. For me, it was driven by character. That's what got it going.
Right. guess what I wanted to say is I didn't mean that it felt as if the characters were marionettes that you were moving around, but plot as being on the line with life itself, I suppose, and they're characters who are who come to life very very specifically, and I've got them in my mind. And I did want to know if you had things out on a whiteboard, and I'm glad to know that you didn't. I didn't really imagine that you had. Let's turn to there's commentary on art and what art is and can be and should be and may be all through the book. And I think that some of this question comes up with the character Blair, who does street art in very interesting, and we might say strange and risky, always risky ways, and anonymously. And I thought it's interesting to think about her and the fact that there is this book and that we are discussing this book and your name is attached to it, and how you've played between. It's a long line between the two, and you've covered the whole thing through your character and your own life as a writer. So I just wondered what comment you might have.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted to write about Ellen, that Ellen would be a poet who, although she doesn't operate anonymously, has become sort of invisible or anonymous because of a sort of failure of belief in herself as a poet, and her anxieties about never really getting a grip and getting it together and making the work. So that represents one kind of artist, and not surprisingly, perhaps one kind of female artist with crises of confidence that are sort of baked in some ways to, the way that making it successfully as an artist of any stripe in a capitalist culture has been traditionally more difficult for women. So there's that. She's that. And then she's got this brother who's a composer who, is on track to be noticed, to achieve a certain kind of real success. And then through a traumatic and tragic loss, he pushes himself into a way of being a composer, not by notating, but by drawing his music, that is pretty much guaranteed to deep six his chances as a conventionally successful, i.e. also paid composer. And then there's Blair, who's the real outlier, who thinks of invisibility as a plus, who's kind of addicted to Camus and some of his thoughts about art and life, but who kind of cherry picks from him. She's not actually a Camus scholar, and she's kind of got a garbled notion of Camus, but an interestingly garbled, I hope. Yes. And she really doesn't want to have her name attached. She wants to disrupt and provoke anonymously. But she does need money, if nothing else, for her supplies. So each of these characters has also a relation to money that is connected to their relation to their art. So one can't really talk about art in this book anyway without talking about money, what one needs to do it or expects to earn from it or not. And I wanted all those questions to be at play, as they certainly have been in my own life, the sort of careening that I felt like I've done between, I don't care, I care a lot, I really want, bring on that fame, and by the way, those dollars, and then no, screw it, I just want to be writing what I'm writing. It's so much better and more fun when I don't have those pressures on me. And, all this is about class and opportunity in America. Of course, these conversations are not happening in a vacuum, but I didn't want to make a novel in which those conversations were overt. I wanted them to be suggested or subtle. And another thing pressing in on these characters' lives, in addition to their financial situations and needs, is the fact of the Iraq War and sort of Blair's resistance to that, and the fact that her art is sort of marshaled against that. The fact that Wynne lost his girlfriend in a terrorist attack in Madrid. You know, these are the other realities that, whether we want to acknowledge them overtly or address them in our art, are there and impinging. So yeah, all of that is sort of working, I hope, as a surround for the intimate challenges and problems and possibilities that these characters have, you know, for good or for ill.
Right. How long did it take you to write the novel?
Oh God, like that's the question, the stab in the heart question. It took for friggin' ever. So you all out there who might be writing things can take for friggin' ever. Yeah, it was a very long time. It was well over a decade. I want to say maybe 13 years. In the midst of which other things were happening. I mean, I was teaching all the way through, but I published my memoir and I did a book-length co-translation with my husband. So it wasn't like I was utterly stalled, but there were some years where I felt pretty much that way, where I just couldn't, I never gave up on the book, but I couldn't find the way forward at certain crucial junctures. I just kept getting stalled. Speaking of plot, plot was some of what stalled me. But also, I knew that I wanted to compress the action within this 30-day period. It's felt credible to me that if you buy a lottery ticket, you have to redeem it within a certain period of time. And I wasn't interested in the story of what does she buy after she wins 100 million. You know, that's like, ugh. But I was interested in how does the entire landscape, inner and outer landscape of her life change in her imagination before she redeems the ticket. And I wasn't interested in what lawyer does she hire or, you know, what money manager. That was also not interesting. So I needed her to be the kind of person who would be deer in headlights and think, oh shit, I can't even. So I'm going to just kind of wait till the end. I mean, I have the ticket. No one's going to, you know, no one can take it from me. It's here in my possession and I will redeem it at the end of that period. But meanwhile, these other things are happening to her. So it ends up being less a story about a woman fumbling her way toward redeeming a lottery ticket than a woman fumbling her way toward redeeming her life. And that, you know, enter a possible romantic relationship, enter a child, enter things that I get in motion in the novel before she gets the ticket, because the reader has to understand that there's something else at play, some other set of challenges, that the pressure of the ticket, you know, just heightens what the pressure of those things are. That's where the story is. It's how is her life going to change before she comes into possession of the ticket. And so the novel, the sort of suspense that's created at the end around the actual redeeming of the ticket is supposed to be accelerated by the sort of tension that's in her already emotionally and intellectually, you know.
Right. It works.
Well, thank
13
you.
years later. That's a long time. That should give any writers on the call, any novelists, a good dose of patience and hope, right? There are lots of animals in the book. There are cats, there are dogs. There's a character who learns about sex from watching animals, which used to be very normal when we lived in different circumstances. We've got plenty of domestic animals around these days, but that most of them don't have their sexual parts anymore. They've all been spayed or whatever. So I found that this was a really interesting, just as there's commentary on money as a theme, having and not having, so there's this sort of remarkable conversation with and around animals and the animal in human beings. Any care to comment? I know you've had a recent
loss of an animal.
in your,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny too, I didn't set out to. I'm very happy, Anne, that you remarked on this, because although it's not a central part of the novel, it still felt important to me that a couple of the characters were had relations to animals that were important, very important to them, and rather singular in their way of being. And Ellen has her two cats, boy cat and girl cat, and the man um, that she becomes involved with has these two dogs, Kay and Nine. So there's these sort of jokes, that it turns out they each kind of have a jokey um, relation to naming, and that connects them, even though he's a gym teacher and she's a poet / freelance editor. They find something in common around that kind of wordplay, that language play, and I wanted that just to be subtle, to sort of help create a bridge in the reader's mind with how does a gym teacher and a poet get together. And there's something, a kind of linguistic playfulness as well as the love for the animals. And then there's Blair's brother Keith, who we never meet because he's not on stage, and he is an extraordinarily disturbed and disturbing person, and Blair as a character has been disturbed by her brother's presence and role in her life. And I don't want to say too much more about that, but she then takes on she identifies herself as a kind of animal, a pup, in relation to him. And that's pretty important, I think, as a means of characterizing what is, there's a great deal of trauma and sort of dysfunction in all that. And that's sort of counterposed with the playfulness and the whimsy and the sort of eros of the animal play between Ellen and her man, because he calls her Dove, a bird. And then there's this bird in this painting. I'm for the reader who hasn't read it, they're going to be like, this is a little weird. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but I hope it all kind of coheres. The animal stuff is threaded through, and there are sort of resonances that I wanted to be there. So I'm happy that you noted them. The cats for Ellen are a real anchor of her, and they represent her solitude, her independence, but also her sort of aloneness and even loneliness. And that, for me personally, as someone who did live alone for quite a while and with a cat, the one who just passed, that felt, I could capture that. I knew what that was. And it felt like in that way, Ellen and I are alike, not in lots of ways, but in that way. Yeah.
I think also, I think you've captured, again, a huge range of sexuality, gender in these relationships. Sort of not shockingly, but surprisingly, surprised to find them all in the same book. And I think you've been very successful in doing that. And that's one of the ways this mostly realistic novel becomes entirely contemporary and like up to the moment.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is one of the reasons it took me time, because I wasn't really happy with, especially Blair. I needed to sort of understand better what was going on with Blair and gender, and, to avoid any sort of absurd and insulting and ridiculous trope of, gender diversity equated with trauma, blah, blah. That would, of course, be horrific. But I'm also always mindful when I look back on the book and I think about the making of the book, that I said it in 2005 when conversations about gender and conversations about possibility were in a very different place. And someone like Blair, coming from the family and the kind of psychological abuse, and trying to assert a way of being in the world that encompassed a way of being in terms of gender, in the face of a non-conversation, a sort of forced invisibility might try to turn that around to, I'm going to make this invisibility work for me. And I'm somehow going to explain my brother's invisibility, my brother's absence, and make it work for me, even though the reasons for that absence are dark. And so, you know, the brother is a dark character. He's also, of course, the one who in Blair's mind, you know, because he loves and rescues animals, is a kind of demigod. And so I wanted to complicate the way in which I feel the conversation about gender's gone, so that it's only about gender. Like everyone talks about gender and gender and gender without talking about gender and what's the nature of the personality who's thinking about and feeling about and going through changes of all kinds in their own way of approaching the world. Like, what's your erotic relationship to the world? From which then I think other questions of gender flow, and distortions happen because society forces them on this. They happen because trauma happens to us. Distortions happen of all kinds, and we've, you know, we're mercifully getting to a point where we can have a conversation where what were labeled distortions aren't, but it still can. When you go back to 2005, you can well imagine how someone could just get really in a messy place around all this, right. A really deeply messy place.
Right.
So,
yes. I think it's noteworthy that there's a good male gymnastics teacher. In view of what's been in the news or was a while ago, he's a remarkably sensitive, vulnerable, and caring male. And you pulled that out really well. You created this character with great finesse. I know that you're leaving the country for your other home, making it your primary home, Italy, in a few days, in fact. And New York is also a character in the story, I feel very strongly. And it occurred to me that this is in some ways a love letter to New York. I wonder if you have any comments.
Yeah, I mean, that observation has been made, and I completely own it. Yeah, I haven't lived in Brooklyn for 6 years. Right now I'm actually out on Long Island at a friend's, but I'm normally in Forest Hills, Queens, which is sort of my adopted borough. But New York is my city. And when I think of myself as an American, I think of myself primarily as a New Yorker, although I was not born there. I was born in New Jersey, but that's imaginatively, that's where I've sort of lived, as well as physically and practically where I've lived and worked. So I started writing this novel thinking, yeah, I'll set it in Brooklyn, but I didn't realize immediately how important Brooklyn would come and also become in the story, and also how important the subway system would be. And then I started realizing, hey, Blair does kind of this thing with her, you know, performance art, her street art, in the city, but in the subway system. And that became really fun, I have to say. That opened up a lot of stuff for me in the book, in terms of plot and in terms of just the physical, rendering the physical environment. It was entertaining for me, and I hope for the reader as well.
Absolutely. And
even the reader who doesn't know the system, you know.
Right. And all the more pleasurable for one who does have some sense of it. Did you do research?
Not that much. I mean, there are allusions in the novel to what actually exists in the New York City subway system, which is some pretty great subway art. I'm not talking about impromptu, ephemeral stuff that humans do in the course of being in the stations, but I'm talking about commissioned work. So I did do I knew some of it myself, and the things that are alluded to are things that I've seen and myself and observed, but I did do a little extra research just into the whole sort of ubiquity of art in the system. It's quite remarkable. New York and Moscow, I think, are the two cities in the world with just fantastic subway art. So there was that. And then the scenes where Blair does stuff in the stations. One station I know really well, and I just sort of went down there and said, yeah, someone could pull this off. And the same with the other. I just kind of looked and poked around and went outside and saw, could you climb up there and could you do that? And I just thought, yeah, you could probably do it. I mean, the MTA guy who reads this book is going to be like, no, no, no. A, don't try that. And B, no, you can't do that. But I think it's credible. I think it's credible. That's all that really mattered to me. So
it's believable to me. But I like the hats. The station with the hats.
Oh, that yeah.
And those aren't highly regarded in the book.
Right.
Anyway, there's one last question. You distinguish between passion and ardor in the book. And I wonder if you could elaborate a bit for us.
Well, of course, I don't distinguish, but a character does.
Right.
This is the lover of Ellen's father, who leaves the family for this man, Bruno, in Italy. So I yanked the reader across to Italy, to a city I know very well there, Cremona, and placed them there. And he's trying to say to her that there's a difference between passion and ardor, and he equates passion with sexual passion and with jealousy, and then with kind of running out of steam. He's old by the time she meets him, in his 80s, and ardor he equates with a kind of loyalty, with a kind of persistence or ongoingness. And I can't say this arose from a belief set of mine or anything, but I just became interested in that distinction as I sort of ventriloquized it, through some other character. And I like the word ardor, always have, but have always felt it can be deployed in many different ways. Cynthia Ozick has her ways, and other people have gone at it. And I just imagined this question of loyalty being one that that this particular character would need to allude to for fairly perverse reasons, given the actual context of what happened in that family. But Ellen herself is a sort of ardent person in that she's loyal to her friends, and and strangely loyal to herself all the way through. I say strangely because it permutes. It has to change. She's not who she appears to be, I think, right at the beginning, but she wants to understand what she's all about, and she's willing to take some risks to do so. And I think what she begins to experience in this new set of relations she enters into is a kind of more ardent, rather than passion per se, but ardor. Yeah. I don't know if that answers it.
Yes, it does. Thank you. What are you working on? What's next? Where are you right now?
Well, I'm in a kind of trifecta of change in that, I'm moving to Italy in a few days, and I just retired from, a teaching career of about 25 years or so, and I have this book just out now. So it's a little hard to think about what I'm going to work on when I get to Italy. I have drafted a new novel, and I know I'm going to look at it again, take it out of the drawer it's sort of been in during the pandemic. When I felt I couldn't really be working on it. I just couldn't focus in that way on that project. I wrote some other essays and things, but I wasn't able to think about the novel, so I will return to that. But essays have been something that have been happening to me, with me, for me.
Right.
So I hope they will continue as well. So a mix of that and those.
Any more translation?
Not programmed, but always open to that. So that, and then I got to beef up my Italian. That's my first order of business, is to just get back in the saddle with my Italian, to be using it all the time.
I hadn't thought of this question before, but what you just said made me wonder if you've read Jhumpa Lahiri's book that she wrote in Italian and translated into English.
I have not. I mean, of course, I've been very aware of her experiment, which is of quite a long duration. And I, turning the conversation back narcissistically to
Yes,
me.
no, this is your evening. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't imagine doing that. I mean, right now, I do want to be writing in my native language. I've enjoyed the experiments I've been on with that, with English over the past few years with this novel, with the essays. And so I do want my writing to happen in that language. But whether I will eventually also start branching out and bringing Italian in, I don't know. I take great pleasure in speaking and listening to Italian at the moment. That's where the pleasure is.
It allows for a different personality, doesn't it?
It does. And a different music, I mean, just the music that I experience being in Italy is remarkable, and I want to be part of it. So
Yeah.
I'll speak.
Well, let's end on that wonderful note. And I just want to open up to questions from the audience. I think there's a chat, but there's a question and answer thing down below. So if you have questions, please just write them down and I will read them aloud and Martha can answer.
And if you don't, that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, sometimes being put on the spot in Zoom chats can be hard.
Except that we can't see anyone, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true too.
Anybody? Let me see if the chat. Okay. All right. Okay. Yay, Jeff. Thank you. How do you think back to the Iraq War as a mental state, since we're now in Trump and post-Trump land?
Oh gosh, that's a really interesting question. It, in a certain sense for us, not for Iraqis, but for us, it feels like, whoa, that was a while ago, and we're talking about something that's a little over 20 years ago. And if the question is directed at me, how do I think back as a mental state? As opposed to how do all of us do so, I needed to do so because I was making these characters who were in that time and place. And for Blair, the war was just an extremely provoking, emotionally provoking, as well as politically provoking time. And so her art is very much in response to that, but envelops other things as well. And I think for Ellen and her brother, the war in Iraq is also related to this event that happened in Madrid, which wasn't directly related to the Iraq war, but indirectly part of the sort of general weather created during that time. And I do remember my own rage and confusion and anguish at these needless, horrifying deaths of Iraqis, and also PS of our troops who are still suffering, the kinds of injuries, a lot of which were brain injuries, of course. So I wanted my characters to be sensitive to the war as politically alert human beings who wouldn't be talking about it all the time, but for whom it would be this sort of underlying platform of instability that their lives were standing on. And that instability, I think we as a nation have been, that sense of we can't trust what our government told us about what we were doing there. And we've been trying to recuperate from that lack of trust. Our whole relationship with the rest of the world was thrown radically off track. And then Trump, of course, only radically worsened that. So the sort of derangement that we engendered through that war and through our lies about that war just has continued to spin out and then took on this extra derangement with Trump. But my characters are at the very start of it. So they're at that moment of, if you think of 9/11 as one really major loss of American, would be innocence or naivete, that sort of grasping for some illusory sense of we're we're not really doing such bad stuff after all, are we? And then you think of the war immediately after that as a continued stripping away of the veil. Then that's the period of time in which my characters are having their private lives affected, by this. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's pretty good. I'm going to combine questions from Kate and Sarah Ann because they're combinable. Have the characters, especially Blair, changed from how you envisioned them initially when you started the project 13 years ago, and how? She says, feel free to skip answering if this involves a spoiler, but does Ellen resolve her crisis of confidence? And then Sarah Ann asks, what's it like to live with your characters for a long time? Do all the turns in their lives, as you're imagining them, make it into the book?
Well, both really good questions. You live with them for a long time and no, not all the turns, but you have to sort of bark up a lot of wrong trees. You have to say, maybe they do this or maybe they think that. And in the course of that, you begin to refine what they're actually capable of, what they actually want, what they actually, dream about, think about, are afraid of, get super excited by. So I had to put them, each of those very different people, through their paces over a long period of time before I began to find out how they would actually respond to certain kinds of challenges, that I also gradually began to realize what those challenges would be and how I would set them up. With Blair, I am a little afraid of spoiler alerts because she is operating in a very particular place that is art and emotion, and she does some pretty wacky things.
Just read the book.
Yeah, I don't want to describe what she does and why she does them. I will say that the art projects were really fun and challenging for me to dream up. And then the emotional stuff, how her family treated her when she was young, and what happened with her brother, that was just a lot of groping around until finally it was like, yes, now I see. Now it kind of locks up. Now it makes sense. So again, I don't know if that answers your questions, but it's the trial and error. If there are writers out there, I just want to endorse put them in and out of things in brief scenic work on the page and just see, do you buy it? And I began to realize certain little bits of information accumulated and then made certain choices more or less possible. So that after Blair had devised several of her art projects, I began to realize, okay, the trajectory is now heading in this way and not that way. And she's going to need money for this and not that. And she's going to need it at this time. And there's a tick-tock in this book, that those 30 days. And I needed Blair and Ellen's lives to sort of begin to intersect in ways that I don't want to talk about.
No,
and so, in order to make all that start to happen, I had to increase pressures at certain moments. And it took time to arrive at what those moments were. It's sort of like musical composition. Where are your beats and where are your rests? And, how do you do the crescendi? What are your tempi? This was a book also about a composer, so that was on my mind a lot.
And a composer who moved from musical notation to, as you said, visual notation. And we can jump again and say character notation or something. Yeah. I don't know what you call it, but it's definitely there, and especially in the way that you just spoke about it. Yeah. We've got another question from Sam. Thanks for the great conversation. I really liked what you each said about life and plot. Martha, what is it like to let new ideas and directions wander into and out of your writing? Can you say more about the freedom and or precarity of writing without a specific plot line in mind?
Oh yeah, great question. And those are the two nouns, adjectives. You do feel a great deal of freedom, but there's a necessary precariousness, which I just tried to stay curious and stay flexible. And and not be discouraged if something just didn't seem to lead anywhere, if I pursued it, if I barked up the tree a bit and, it just didn't quite give me a new aperture. And I found I had to toggle among characters and have them do certain things. I mean, there's a moment where there's this painting involved, and the painting initially just involves a couple of people, but then I found a way to make it involve someone else. And once that happened, certain responses that the characters have to the sort of this painting in their lives and what happens to the painting created new opportunities, new freedom for me in developing relationships. This all sounds rather abstract, but it's just by way of saying that sometimes it's a kind of magic object that opens a door, it becomes some kind of an aperture for new interactions. I needed to triangulate a couple of people that were just in pair. I needed to find a way to bring a third in, and the object helped me do that. So it's just a lot of experimenting in the way that I think the best time I had was when I felt more like a kid, just pushing the Legos around or the blocks in the sand, or, with your shovel at the beach and just going, oops, the castle just fell because all the water went in. And, just those discoveries like, oh, the water. Well, then if I throw more sand in over here, look at that, a new wall. It really felt like that a lot of the time, just messing about. But it's time consuming, and one has to have confidence and really have it, like really assert it as it's okay to have it in the face of what feels like failings, or failures in the moment, which really aren't. The real failure is walking away. That's the saying, no, I won't play. So once I realized that, I just kept playing, even if it sort of felt like, ugh, that was a bad sandcastle,
Passion and ardor, right?
Yeah, really, in a way. Yeah, passion alone won't do it, but sort of it's staying the course,
Of a writer.
Yeah.
I think you used to run, right? Did you used to run?
I did a while ago. I mean, not in any professional, serious way, but yeah, I did.
I'm just wondering, it sounds to me like most of your ideas and the building and the playing and so on come in the act of writing. And I wonder to what extent, once you're living with these characters, you're struck by something that you've been looking for, not while you're working on the page, but like buying carrots or whatever in the
or running. I have to say that in the past, I'd say 15 years or so, the act of walking and thinking while walking has become really important to me. And I do feel like I resolved a couple of things that way by just walking a lot and going to Italy and being quiet, being out of the city, actually, being out of the noise and the sort of general overstimulation of the urban environment also really helps. So varying my physical surround, changing it up that way made a big difference. I don't think the book could have been written only in the city. I really don't. I think I really had to get out at certain points.
What a statement.
Well, one must know that about oneself. I know plenty of writers who would sort of say the opposite about the country, like great, but only for the weekend, and I'm choosing now. I'm voting with my feet. I'm about to go to a medieval village that has 3 people in it, 2 of whom are my husband and myself. So, I'm voting for real quiet, but every writer, every artist has to know what they need that way. Yeah.
Well, any more questions, people out there? If none, I think we've had a full and satisfying, rich conversation, Martha, and love being able to just look at you and listen. And I'll miss you when you're no longer in New York, but maybe we'll do an Italy, Greece thing, and we can always Zoom, and there will be more books to read. And I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. and buy this book. It's a marvelous read. And
I want to thank you, Anne, for fabulous questions and for this rich hour and for doing this with me. And yeah, we will obviously, and thank God for Zoom that way, that it's one way we can stay in touch even when we're not in each other's physical spaces. So, and thank you to Green Apple, Erica, and everyone there for hosting this and letting Anne and me do our thing. We'd be sitting with tea or wine or something in San Francisco if we could, but you've provided this space. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who
thank
came.
you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. You can buy Me Love in store and online at greenapplebooks.com. We've got plenty of copies.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Thanks. Be well, everyone.
One.
Bye-bye.